Awakened Living is a 21st century movement for people who consider themselves spiritual but not religious, who have a deep hunger for connected community and a divine impulse for personal and global transformation. Our mission is to encourage and inspire the awakening of human consciousness. Good evening. Welcome to Awakened Living Television. My name is TJ Woodward. I am the Minister and Spiritual Director of Awakened Living in San Francisco and the host of your show. I'm also really pleased to announce that I have recently published my new book, Conscious Being, which is now available in bookstores nationwide and on Amazon.com. Awakened Living Television was created with a very clear intention of bringing on guests of diverse backgrounds to have a conversation about 21st century spirituality. And if the word spirituality doesn't work, it can be living your best life or living your most dynamic, connected life. So what I love about this show is I get to bring on guests and have a conversation relevant to this topic and more. And this evening, I'm especially pleased because my guest this evening is Roland Williams. Roland is a very close friend of mine and just an incredible person in general and a pioneer really in the field of addiction recovery here in the Bay Area. I call him the Johnny Appleseed of addiction recovery treatment centers in the Bay Area. I'll let him explain a little bit more about that, but Roland is someone who has such a dynamic commitment and to his field and to helping people recover from addiction and getting connected with their most dynamic life. So Roland, I am so happy that you're here on the show. And maybe you can tell them a little bit about why I would call you Johnny Appleseed. But before we begin our conversation, why don't you let our viewers know a little bit about you and your work?
Great. It's a pleasure to be here, TJ, by the way. My name is Roland Williams, and I'm an addictions therapist. I've been working in the industry since 1986, and my primary goal is to help individuals and families who struggle with addiction to end that struggle and find their way to recovery. I've been very, very fortunate in having the opportunity to do this work with many, many people from all walks of life all over the world. So it is a pleasure to be here. That's my passion. And I think that what TJ means about me being the Johnny Appleseed of recovery in the Bay Area, which I love that. But I was the director of behavioral health services at Good Samaritan Hospital in San Jose, Los Gatos, and helped start the residential and intensive outpatient chemical dependency and psychiatric programs there. I went on to become the co-founder of Bayside Marin, which is a upscale residential substance abuse program in San Rafael, and then later was the co-founder and executive director for Altamira Recovery Centers in Sausalito. I continue to do this work. I work with a lot of impaired healthcare professionals, and it's just really a joy to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Roland. And I know before the show we talked about what we wanted to talk about, and what I would love to have a conversation with you about is the role of 12-step recovery in the treatment field. The addiction recovery field is changing rapidly.
Yes.
And one of the dramatic changes, as you know, that we've seen is not just 12-step. Right, so there's a lot of other options. So I wanted to talk with you a little bit about the role of 12-step programs in the recovery process, recognizing that it isn't for everyone, but those who it is for, it works really well. There's been, I've noticed in the media a lot, kind of some attacks on 12-step programs recently, and in a lot of the clients I work with, they've had just incredible luck, success, and recovery through 12-step programs, and also not for everyone. So let's have that conversation in general about 12-step recovery and what maybe you think does work well about it, and anything to kick off the conversation you'd like to start with.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the topic. I think it's a very timely topic, and your show is about people living their best life and being their authentic self. And I know that's a big thing. You talk about that quite a bit, people finding their authentic self and living that life. And for many, many people and families, addiction prevents that from happening. And throughout our history as mankind, there's always been some desire from human beings to change the way they feel, usually through some substance, often through some substance, in addition to other ways that people try to do that. And so alcoholism and drug addiction and other types of addiction have been around for centuries. In 1935, AA was founded, Alcoholics Anonymous was founded, and the purpose of AA was to help alcoholics achieve sobriety, because historically there were no really good answers for what to do with alcoholics. They were doing lobotomies, they were doing electroshock therapy, they were putting alcoholics in asylums, insane asylums, they were treating them as criminals. And the society at large felt like these alcoholics and these drug addicts were losers. And when AA came about, AA offered a spiritual awakening. It offered a way out of the addiction and via the 12 steps. And the 12th step actually says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to help other alcoholics and addicts and practice these principles, these spiritual principles in all of our affairs. And that changed everything, because for a lot of people who had historically felt hopeless, now there seemed to be a solution. There seemed to be something that was working. They found that the therapeutic value of one alcoholic helping another was without parallel. And for many, many years afterwards, probably for the last, AA has just turned 80 years old, by the way, but for the last, 50 some odd years, treatment programs have adapted the AA model of recovery. And many treatment programs actually would tailor how they deliver services in accordance with the 12-step principles and philosophies. Judges would sentence people to AA. If they got a drunk driving, the judge might sentence that person to an AA meeting. And nobody really questioned that for quite a while, because it seemed like it worked. In the last 20 years, people have started to notice that although AA works for many people, it doesn't work for everybody. And I like how you introduced your show today when you said that, if the term spirituality bothers you, then there's other ways that you could consider it, that you just want to live your best life, to be the best person that you can be, and to eliminate things that prevent you from doing that. So a lot of people, it turned out, didn't like the idea of spirituality at all. A lot of people in this day and age, remember, they wanted to take the prayer out of the schools. They wanted to take God out of the discussion. They wanted to separate church and state. So there's been actually a big movement that's kind of been anti-spirituality. And AA has really suffered from that. People have started to say that, there's been many recently in the last few months, there have been several articles published that speak to the irrationality of AA. There have been books published that are really testimonials from people who had a bad experience in AA. There's a program called Rational Recovery that was started by a guy named Jack Trimpey. And he hated AA, and his belief was that he would say that I went to those meetings and they threw me down those 12 steps. He felt that AA was anti-intellectual, that it was negative, that it was unfair. He didn't like that they would say stuff like "keep it simple, stupid," and "take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth," and "your best thinking got you here," and "you need to turn your will and your life over to the care of God." And he objected to all of that. And out of a resentment towards AA, he started Rational Recovery. AA has the big book, he wrote the small book. And so he went on, a lot of his work was anti-AA, but it provided an option for people. He was one of the first people to do that. But now there's lots of controversy. Courts are no longer allowed to sentence people to AA meetings because they say it violates the separation of church and state. So treatment professionals have had to really step back and review whether or not this really works and whether or not we should be considering options for people who AA does not work for, which I think is true. I love the 12-step program, but I realize that what keeps one person clean and sober might get another person drunk. And so as treatment professionals, as an recovery industry, we have to be open-minded enough to look at not what worked for us, but what might work for other people. And so that's where a lot of the discussion and the change is happening. You know, in addition to that, there has been a big movement against the whole total abstinence model. It's not just about AA. It's about, do you even need to be clean and sober? You know, I mean, why can't we put you on maintenance opiates, for example? Maybe it's not realistic to expect a person to be clean and sober. They look at the recidivism rate as being so high. They think, well, why should we set people up to fail? So now you've got people arguing that AA does not work. You've got people arguing that total abstinence does not work. And what I'm concerned about is that we will wind up throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, that we will derail people from a path that we know leads to a spiritual awakening. You know, the fact is that for those people that it does work, when people get engaged in the 12-step program, they get engaged in the community or the fellowship, they will change. It changes you. It's much like, and it's not so much a religion, but it's a practice. It's a way of life. And you could compare it to the Ten Commandments. You could compare it to the Golden Rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. You could compare it to the Four Noble Truths. You could compare it to the Four Agreements. You can compare it to any course of action that would result in you being a better person.
Yeah.
And I believe that's what happens, and that's what we're at risk. That's what's in jeopardy right now.
Yeah, and of course, one of the things I love about you, Roland, is that you are able and willing to let people find their own path,
Exactly.
as long as they're finding a path, right?
Exactly.
And that's one of the
Exactly.
things that you and I have seen over and over again. Someone may go to AA and have some resistance to it, and you know, quite often some of what they say is valid. You know, then we're going to look at what does work for them in AA, and if it's not going to be that, what is it going to be? But what I've seen over and over again is they do throw the baby out with the bathwater. So it's not that, and then maybe they have a sense that there isn't anything else to replace that with. So I think it might be fun if you're willing, if I can kind of present you some things that are being said about AA that might be slightly negative, so we can kind of talk through that, and then also, you know, through the lens of what are some other options for people when it really doesn't work. We know we have LifeRing, we have Smart Recovery, we now have Refuge Recovery, which is a new program that's just launching. They have a new basic text started by Noah Levine that's a Buddhist approach to recovery. So through that lens, some of what I've heard, and in these recent articles and even in the treatment field about AA, is one of the things I've been hearing is there's really no statistics to prove that it works. What would you say about that?
Right. Well, I think that AA is notoriously, it's called Alcoholics Anonymous, and they don't use names and they don't use last names in AA, and so, and that was intentional. So AA deliberately wanted to, in its creation, wanted to provide a safe, anonymous place for people to pursue their goal of sobriety. And so as a result of that, there are very few statistics about the efficacy of AA. AA doesn't do outcome studies. They don't take a roll call. They don't keep attendance lists. So the few statistics that you'll see about AA come from occasionally when there's a convention, a world convention or a regional convention, they will circulate a survey to the members that are present at the convention and ask questions about AA and their participation in AA. That kind of data collection does not lead to good statistics. So, whoever would say that would be correct. AA does not keep good statistics. I can tell you from my personal and professional experience is that roughly, probably maybe anywhere from 5 to 30% of people who go to AA are still going a year later. So for one, that we know that the dropout rate, so to speak, is very high. And a lot of the reasons for that is that many people are initially referred to AA through some sort of external pressure, either legally or family-wise or an intervention or work situation. They're not going there because they want to go. So as a result, when they don't have to go anymore, they stop going. The sobriety statistics, which again are not clearly provable, are something like maybe 10% of people who go stay clean and sober from day one. Another 20% relapse and then get clean and sober. So what I've heard, and what I believe is probably true, about 30%, about 10 to 15% of people get clean and sober and stay clean and sober from the beginning. Another 20 to 30% of people relapse and then they get clean and sober and stay clean and sober. And then there's a whole nother group of people who continuously relapse and never get clean and sober.
Yeah, so another thing that people seem to be talking about, it's very fresh for me because I was just working with clients in very real time that were having some things that they were having aversion to AA. And one of the things they said is it just feels really rigid, very dogmatic. Like I go there and they tell me I have to go to a certain number of meetings, I have to read this book. There's a sense that I got from these clients that their feeling was this is the only way, our way or the highway, kind of. And I don't know if that's been your experience with clients, if there's something to that.
You'd have to compare that to, and sometimes AA gets a bad rap because an individual in AA is not AA. So, I mean, you get a lot of people that go to church, and then somebody in the church will see him at the supermarket and say, well, Brother TJ, I didn't see you at church last week. And they will give you this accusatory look and this judgmental air and this self-righteous energy, and it might turn you off. And you might walk away saying, I don't like that church. But it's not really about the church. It's about that person and the way that person does it. And so AA is very similar to that, So you might have some people in AA who have some very strong opinions, and they may seem extremely self-righteous, but that's not AA. That's that individual's way that they practice it. And so, I think that for a lot of people, AA can feel, certainly there are suggestions about what you ought to do. There are suggestions about working the steps. There are suggestions about getting a sponsor. None of that stuff is mandated, but it is encouraged if you're going to really, reap the benefits of quote unquote working a 12-step program.
One other thing that I've heard a lot, and actually it's been a little bit, I'll just be really transparent, it's been a little bit my own experience too, is this need to label that there's something wrong here. To continue to call someone their addiction for life, for example. My name is and I am. And also a sense that there's something broken here and the steps are to fix that. And I'm wondering what, I guess my question really is, because in my experience that's incredibly crucial early on. One must identify the issue that needs to be worked on in order for them to live this more dynamic life. But then after some time, is it still important to continue to identify as an addict or an alcoholic, and what's your experience with that?
Well, there's a lot of controversy about that. There's another self-help support group called Women for Sobriety, because they found that women weren't so safe in the 12. Everybody in AA is not in recovery, by the way. Everybody in NA is not in recovery. So just because you go into the meeting doesn't mean that you're living a recovery life. So a woman called Jean Fitzpatrick started a program called Women for Sobriety, and the way they would introduce themselves is, my name is Helen, and I'm a competent woman. For the very reason that you're talking about. The guy Jack Trempey used to say that if I stopped smoking 10 years ago, I won't call myself a smoker. So if I stopped drinking 10 years ago, why will I call myself an alcoholic? Other opposing positions say that self-identification as an addict or an alcoholic reinforces a negative image. However, much like the gay community kind of claimed the term queer and took that from being a negative thing to being something affirming, just like blacks have taken some terms used to describe blacks and taken some ownership with it. Alcoholics and addicts don't see the term alcoholic in many cases as a negative term. It actually is empowering. And when a person says, my name is Roland and I'm an addict, it's just a reminder for me that I have to remember that I am always going to be prone to overdo anything that feels good to me. You know, that's my tendency. And so people use that as a relapse prevention, the people that it works for. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. Some people consider themselves recovering. Some people consider themselves recovered. Some people call themselves addicts and alcoholics, and some people call themselves dope fiends and junkies and drunks. And some people don't continue to identify that way. There's no right way to do it. And so I think that one of the problems with our, is we remember what the goal is. The goal is for people to get better. You need to find what works for you. There's an old saying that, the goal is to get to Philadelphia. I don't care if you drive, if you fly, if you take the train, if you take the bus, just get to Philadelphia. And what we're asking people to do is we want to see you have the life that you're intended to have. And if you don't want to, if it's easier for you to say you're an addict or an alcoholic, go for it. If you don't prefer to use that term, but you still choose to, practice abstinence, go for it. Find what works for you. And I think we as helping professionals need to support people finding their own path.
Yeah, and I know that you do that brilliantly.
Yeah.
So that's something I've always appreciated about you.
Thank you.
One thing that came up that in talking, you mentioned women, you mentioned gays and lesbians, and you mentioned African Americans. So what about, because I do hear this a lot too, I hear AA was started by straight white men. I hear that one. And then I also, like for example, in the African American community, I once actually was interviewing people about the efficacy of AA within that specific community. And what I was actually surprised to hear that what I heard from this group that I was interviewing was that the concept of powerlessness does not work for our community. Now, again, this is one person kind of speaking for an entire community, but he was saying, we have been repressed for so long, and powerlessness isn't going to work for me. I want to find a way to empower myself. So I wondered if you could speak, and you already did a little bit, about what we might call minorities that are in AA that maybe have a little bit different life experience than what the norm is in some meetings.
Well, I work in Thailand, so I go back and forth to Thailand, and the Thai people, we have a rehab over there, and the Thai people typically don't go to rehab. And the reason for that is that to say that I'm powerless and my life is unmanageable brings shame to that person and to their family. So it's culturally, sometimes the fundamental theories and philosophies of AA conflict with people's culture. I have, by many people, considered an expert on addiction in the African American community. I've written books on that topic. I've written published articles on that topic, and I teach on that topic all over the country. This weekend, I'm teaching at a conference on that particular topic. So I don't think that's, the idea of African Americans feeling like, we don't identify as powerless. I don't agree with that. I think that that's not the issue. I think that what is more of a challenge for African Americans in AA and in addiction treatment is feeling connected and trusting the group. And what I'm seeing in my career, in my travels, is that fewer and fewer African Americans are going to treatment and going to self-help support groups. And the ones who do go seem to do better in groups where there are other African Americans in the group. They do better in treatment programs where there are other African Americans in the treatment program. If they're the only black guy or black woman there in a group, they don't connect as well because there's trust issues that have been reinforced in society for centuries, that we question whether or not this person is trustworthy and whether I belong. We question whether or not we're getting fair treatment. And so when I self-disclose also, I've been in recovery since June 10th, 1986. And when I first went into a treatment and to my first 12-step meeting, I looked for somebody who looked like me. And so I think that's the biggest challenge for a lot of these minority groups, is to walk in and feel, for lack of a better word, minority group, is to walk in and feel like these people understand me, they get me, it's safe here, I belong here, I trust them.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because that really is exactly my experience. I work at Foundation's intensive outpatient program, and a few months back I was part of launching our LGBT track. Very, very similar thing. As a gay man walking into, and I'll disclose myself, on June of 1986 too, as you know. And I love that we share that. That if there's not another gay person in the room, there's a sense of, am I safe here? You know, because of that same, you know, obviously everyone has a different personal experience, but the cultural norm of not being accepted in what we might call a heteronormative world. And I want to reference something, this article that I'm sure you've probably read recently, that the opposite of addiction is not recovery, or not abstinence, but it's connection. There was a study done, the one with the mice that were drinking cocaine, but you put them in a lush environment with other mice, and they actually mostly chose water over cocaine. And the idea was that connection is the most important aspect of recovery. And I certainly see that being a brilliant aspect of 12-step recovery. You know, people get to walk in and really connect with people that they can relate to. And so I can absolutely see, you know, for an African American, for a woman, for a gay man, or anyone, that we're going to scan that room. You know, where's someone like me so I can feel connected?
Yeah. I think that's true. I think that feeling connected is a critical part of the recovery and the healing process. And I think that's one of the reasons that the spirituality component works for so many people, is because even when there's nobody else in the room, if you have a spiritual connection with some sort of higher power, you never feel alone. You feel like, you know, I'm not in this by myself, that my higher power has my back, that there's some sort of divine order to what's going on for me. And that's one of the reasons that I think that the 12-step program works for so many people. And as we talked about before the show, that for people who do not like a 12-step program, and by the way, you mentioned there's Smart Recovery and Life Ring and Women for Sobriety and Celebrate Recovery for Christian people, and the Red Road to Recovery for Native Americans. There are alternatives, but for people who don't want that, and they just want to do it on their own, they want to think their way through it, not that that can't happen, but those people have to work twice as hard. And a big part of that work is achieving the connectiveness, the connections with other people, the fellowship, the sense of a fellowship that people get automatically in a 12-step program.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, believe it or not, we're out of time.
Wow.
We have maybe time for you to, well, we definitely have time for you to tell people how to find you, but I just want to say thank you so much for this conversation. And my hope for this conversation is that we've opened up people's mind to explore the possibilities. Because I do hear time and time again, you know, working in the treatment field for several years, I'll hear a client come in and say, well, I hate AA. And they'll say, well, tell me more. And they'll tell, and then inevitably someone will say, how many meetings did you go to? And they'll say one.
Exactly.
You know, so what I love is that, you know, let's explore with an open mind and recognize that it works brilliantly for so many people. And then if it doesn't, how do we replicate that community, that sense of connection? So thank you for this conversation. I hope that this will help people out there. And in closing, if you could tell our viewers a little bit, or just how to find you.
Okay. Yeah, so my website is pretty easy to remember. It's www.rolandwilliamsconsulting.com. Not counseling, it's consulting, rolandwilliamsconsulting.com. And you can feel free to call me by phone, and that area code is 415-845-1174. And my email address is roland@rolandwilliamsconsulting.com. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, Roland, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm always delighted to be in conversation with you. And I do, my intention for our viewers is that we have opened up a dialogue or opened up a possibility that you can explore what works for you, for anyone who is suffering from addiction. I'll say this, though, you know, recently it came to me that it's only when it starts causing problems in our life that we call it addiction. Otherwise, we just call it fun. So if it's switched from fun to problems and you're looking for some help, please reach out to a professional. Please check out AA, Life Ring, refuge recovery, a treatment program near you. I have seen treatment and 12-step programs in beautiful combination of different modalities to help people live an incredibly connected and purposeful life. So thank you so much, our viewers, for tuning in. You can find more information about Awakened Living online at awakenedlivingsf.org. And please check out my book, Conscious Being. That website is consciousbeingbook.com. Thank you so much, and good night.